4,000 Weeks 2021 is a self-help book about using our time effectively, but not in the conventional sense. British journalist and author Oliver Burkeman argues that time management as we know it has failed horribly, and we need to stop pretending otherwise. The average human life expectancy is outrageously short. If you live to be 80, you'll have lived for about 4,000 weeks. Thus, it's no surprise that ancient Greek philosophers considered the brevity of human life to be the defining problem of our existence. Unfortunately, the modern discipline of time management seems to focus solely on productivity. While productivity matters to some extent, we must remember that the world is full of wonder, and we should make time to experience more of that wonder. An unstoppable conveyor belt. Nowadays, no one needs reminding that there isn't enough time. Not only are our 4,000 weeks constantly being consumed, but it seems that the fewer of them we have left, the more they seem to slip away. It's a truly brutal arrangement. According to American anthropologist Edward T. Hall, time feels like an unstoppable conveyor belt, handing us new tasks the second we complete the old ones. And the more productive we are, the faster the belt moves, and the more burned out we feel. The perplexing truth about time, which most time management gurus seem to overlook, is that the harder we try to control time and make it adhere to our agenda, the more it slips away from us. Our obsession with getting things done makes us live mentally in the future, waiting until we finally have time to do the things we enjoy and spend time with the people we love, while simultaneously worrying that we're not doing enough to keep up with the fast pace of life. The disciplines of time management and productivity have failed miserably. They're a trap. The truth is that increasing your efficiency only makes you more rushed. You'll never have everything under control no matter what you do. But guess what? That's great news. Time as a resource. When time became standardized and visible through the first mechanical clocks, people inevitably began perceiving it as an abstract thing with an independent existence. They started treating it as a resource to be bought, sold, and effectively utilized. When time becomes a resource, you feel obligated to make the best use of it, and you punish yourself when you believe you've squandered it. Your feeling of self-worth becomes inextricably linked to how you spend your time, and you end up feeling like you're never doing well enough. Our time constraints aren't the main issue. Rather, it's that we've inadvertently adopted a problematic set of assumptions about how to spend our limited time, assumptions that are almost certain to make matters worse. People obsess over productivity to avoid fully experiencing the reality in which they find themselves. We shudder at the thought that this is the only life we'll ever have, with all of its faults and inevitabilities, its extreme shortness and little control over how it unfolds. The majority of our productivity techniques are simply ways to prolong the avoidance. To numb ourselves emotionally, we keep ourselves busy, distract ourselves, or plan obsessively because then we won't have to deal with how little control we have over the future. According to the paradox of limitation, when you attempt to manage your time to achieve a sense of total control, life becomes stressful and frustrating. However, when you face your limitations and work with them, rather than against them, life becomes meaningful and enjoyable. A change in mindset definitely won't make all your problems with time disappear. Most of these problems come from external factors anyway. However, once you understand that the demands on your time are impossible, you'll be better equipped to resist them and instead focus on creating a more meaningful existence. A more rational approach. It's irrational to feel overwhelmed by an enormous to-do list. A more rational approach is to understand that you'll do what you can. However, we rarely take the time to think things through rationally, since doing so would force us to face the harsh reality of our limitations. The best cure to the feeling of time pressure, and the first step toward accepting your limits, is understanding that the problem with attempting to fit everything that feels essential into your schedule is that you never will. Even if you do manage to cram more into your schedule, you'll notice that more activities begin to feel essential, relevant, or mandatory. This cruel irony is especially noticeable when it comes to emailing. The faster you process your emails, the faster you receive new ones. The harder you try to cram everything in, the more time you'll wind up wasting on insignificant matters. That's because the more certain you are that you can fit everything in, the less pressure you'll feel to question whether any particular activity is a good use of your time. Once your peace of mind is no longer determined by how many demands you're able to handle, it becomes easier to find peace of mind in the present. There will always be too much to do, So resist the urge to do everything and instead focus on important matters. Our finitude. Martin Heidegger was a German philosopher who delved most deeply into the topic of what it means to be a finite human being with finite time on the planet. He examines the most fundamental and familiar elements of existence and makes them unfamiliar through his use of unfamiliar terms. Every instant of a human's existence is infused with the fact of our finitude, as Heidegger puts it. Our limited time isn't simply another thing we have to cope with. It's the thing that defines us as humans before we even begin to cope with anything at all. Thus, any decision we make is radically limited. As we make multiple small decisions throughout the day, we're building a life, but we're simultaneously closing off the possibility of countless other lives permanently. The only real question regarding our finitude is whether or not we're willing to face it. When we disregard the fact that our time is limited, we're unable to value the present moment. But when we consciously confront the truth of our finitude and the certainty of death, we can become truly and fully present for our lives, which suddenly feel more meaningful. We tend to possess a very entitled attitude towards our existence. We assume we deserve an unlimited supply of time when the truth is that it's a miracle we've been granted any time at all. By acknowledging this fact, we can understand what it means to be alive right now. When we acknowledge this truth about finitude, the fear of missing out transforms into the exhilarating realization that we wouldn't want to be able to do everything, since if we didn't have to choose what to miss out on, our choices would be meaningless. Loss is a given. Many of the philosophers who've pondered human finitude assert that the primary difficulty of managing our limited time isn't how to get everything done, but how to wisely choose what not to do, and how to be content with not doing it. First of all, you must pay yourself first when it comes to time. So, if an activity matters to you, the only way to be sure it will happen is to do some of it today, no matter how many other important matters are tugging at you. Second, you must set a limit on the number of projects you may work on at any given moment. When you start a lot of projects at once, you generally make little progress and wind up with half-finished projects on the back burner. Third, you must resist the allure of moderately appealing priorities. These are the ambitions and activities that aren't as essential to you in your life, yet they are seductive enough to distract you from the ones that matter. Good procrastinators accept that they won't be able to do everything, then wisely choose what tasks to prioritize and what to ignore. Bad procrastinators, on the other hand, find themselves paralyzed because they're unable to face their limitations. We almost always favor indecision over committing to a particular route. We fantasize about simultaneously living a multitude of lives, but as soon as we try living any of them, we're obliged to sacrifice a plethora of other options. Loss is a given, so there's no point in resisting commitment. The attention economy. The attention economy is a machine that feeds off people's finite lives and attention. It is a system that is designed to keep people hooked on whatever content it wants to show them, and then selling their attention to advertisers. This is how free social media platforms make money. The attention economy systematically distorts our view of the world because it is intended to emphasize what's most compelling rather than what's most truthful or beneficial. It impacts our perceptions of what's important, and all these distorted judgments then impact how we spend our time offline. It doesn't matter how dedicated you are to making the most of your limited time if you're always getting distracted by things on which you never wanted to focus. And what you pay attention to determines what reality is for you. So it's not an exaggeration to suggest that when you give attention to something you don't value, and that doesn't have your best interest at heart, you're paying with your life. Nowadays, we're advised to respond to this situation by making ourselves indistractable in the face of interruptions. However, this disregards another truth about human limitation. Complete control over your attention is definitely unattainable, and if it were, it would be quite dangerous. A futile escape. We often resort to distraction to avoid dealing with an unpleasant aspect of our present experience. We wait for any excuse to distract ourselves from working, for example, when the real issue is not the activity itself, but our internal reluctance to experiencing it. When we're working on something important, we're forced to face our limits. And to flee this unpleasant encounter with our finitude and our limited control over our limited time, we resort to distraction because our finitude makes it impossible to know for sure how things will turn out. The techniques commonly suggested for overcoming distraction rarely work because they don't address the urge itself. You'll probably still find it difficult to concentrate on important matters. The most effective way to defeat your inner interrupter is to simply accept the unpleasantness. There's no other solution. An unreliable future. According to Hofstadter's law, every task you plan to do will always take longer than anticipated. Even when we consider this law, the activities we attempt to plan for aggressively oppose our efforts to make them adhere to our agenda. That isn't to say we shouldn't plan ahead. Planning is a necessary tool for building a meaningful life and carrying out our responsibilities to others. The real issue isn't planning, it's that we don't realize that a plan is simply a statement of intent in the present moment. Worry is fueled by an inherent desire to know ahead of time that everything will be fine. However, this fight for control over the future presents striking evidence of our inability to face our inherent limitations. We must acknowledge that the future can never be turned into something dependable. We tend to assume that time is something we can possess or control. But this assumption is what causes our anxiety about the future because our expectations are constantly thwarted by the unyielding reality that time does not belong to us and cannot be controlled. Yet we all made it to this point in our lives despite our complete lack of control over the future. In fact, most of what we love and value in life only ever came to pass as a result of situations we could never have predicted. Illusion of control. The more we try to make good use of our time, the more each day feels like something we have to get through to reach a better and more rewarding point in the future. A point that never arrives because we find ourselves constantly postponing our fulfillment. However, it isn't completely our fault that we approach our short time in such a future-focused manner. External pressures are always shoving us in that direction because we live under a capitalist economy that instrumentalizes everything it encounters to generate profit. The capitalist pressure to commodify your time robs your life of any meaning and renders you almost incapable of conceiving activities that can't be commodified as something worth doing at all. Still, we can't only blame capitalism. We choose to treat time in this commodifying way because it allows us to preserve the illusion of total control over our lives. But as long as we're assuming that life's real meaning lies in the future, we'll be missing out on life. Life's center of gravity. The modern world's emphasis on using time efficiently has created pressure for people to use leisure time productively. Anyone who lived before the Industrial Revolution would have found this attitude toward leisure exceedingly odd. Back then, leisure was worth choosing for its own sake. It was life's center of gravity. Unfortunately, all that was shattered by industrialization and the commodification of time. Leisure was permissible, but only for the purposes of recovery to increase your productivity or any other form of self-improvement. Otherwise, it was considered wasteful. You couldn't use it for pure enjoyment. But to fully enjoy life, we need to start spending leisure time on activities that are centered on pleasure rather than future-oriented self-improvement. Yet, we've developed a pathological inability to rest. We find it quite uncomfortable to take a break from our attempts to get things done, and we become agitated when we believe we're not being productive enough. Resting for the sake of resting and genuinely enjoying your leisure time requires first acknowledging the fact that your days aren't advancing toward a future state of total happiness or perfection, and that approaching them with such an assumption progressively devalues our finite time. The importance of patience. One of the basic principles of Taoism, an ancient Chinese religion, is that things just are the way they are, no matter how much you wish they weren't. Your only chance of having any substantial influence on reality is to work with it rather than against it. We've all become incredibly impatient. Ever since things became more convenient with the advent of technology, people have begun feeling increasingly irritated because they want to make things move even faster. They want to have complete control over their time as it unfolds. We've grown so accustomed to a life of perpetual motion and distraction that the very notion of doing things more slowly causes us great anxiety. And to avoid dealing with such intense negative emotions, we turn to our smartphones or any other form of high-speed living. You know you should stop, but you can't because the same thing that's causing you this anxiety, high-speed living, has become the only way to control it, when in reality, it's what's contributing to it. This is the vicious cycle that is at the heart of addiction's psychological basis. To overcome this, you must accept that things take their time, and that you cannot soothe your anxiety by working faster. The faster you go, the more you'll feel the need to go even faster. The sort of patience that comes from resisting the temptation to rush things is anything but passive or resigned. In a world such as ours, patience has become a power. It is a valuable skill that can positively influence different aspects of your life. If you can put up with the discomfort of not knowing and not being in control, a solution will usually come about. This applies to your career, relationships, politics, and parenting, among other things. When you stop trying to avoid the discomfort of time passing so slowly, the discomfort subsides. When you stop pointlessly trying to control the pace of an experience, the real experience can begin. You tighten your grip on reality. Unsynchronize. People constantly infringing on your time in a variety of ways can be quite frustrating. But there's no point in having lots of time if you're forced to spend it on your own. In fact, it can be quite unpleasant. To use your time effectively, whether to socialize, start a business, or establish political movements, you must sync it with other people's time. Our society seems to have developed an individualist mentality intensified by the demands of the market economy. This mentality has overridden our traditional means of organizing time, resulting in more uncoordinated hours of rest, work, and socialization. To address our lack of synchronization, we must attempt to resist the notion of individual time sovereignty by, for example, joining amateur choirs or sports teams, and choosing activities in the real world over those in the digital one. It's preferable to think of our time as something to share rather than something to hoard. The more personal temporal freedom you have, the more difficult it becomes to coordinate your time with other people's time and to form deeper connections with them. A most liberating truth. People tend to be paralyzed by the idea of what they should do with their life. They often think that they should be doing something meaningful. But the liberating truth is that what you do with your life doesn't matter all that much. It's not your duty to do something meaningful. Acknowledging how insignificant your own life is in the grand scheme of things can be quite frightening, but it's also consoling in the sense that all the anxieties that plague your daily life suddenly become trivial matters. Overvaluing your existence leads to an unrealistic notion of what it means to make the best use of your limited time. It implies that for your life to be considered well-lived, you must have accomplished a great deal. But from a truly cosmic perspective, none of that matters. That's why being reminded of your insignificance is so relieving. It makes you realize that you've been holding yourself to standards that are impossible to meet. And realizing this isn't just reassuring. It's also liberating because you're no longer bound by such an absurd definition of a life well spent. Your path. You have to accept that you can't avoid making difficult decisions, that you can't make the world move at your pace, and that no encounter can ever be guaranteed to be painless and successful in advance. From a cosmic perspective, none of this stuff matters anyway. And when you can finally accept all that, you get to actually be here. You get to spend your limited time focusing on the few things that matter to you in themselves right now in the present. According to psychoanalyst Carl Jung, your path is a path, which is never prescribed, which you do not know in advance, and which simply comes into being itself when you put one foot in front of the other. This path requires you to quietly do the next most necessary thing.